There we go. All right. It's like I used to a little bit more bass in my voice, but this is great. Thank you all so much for coming back for day two of this summit on education, and also thank you to our online audience for your engagement and participation yesterday and also today. So yesterday we had some really good conversations linking education to opportunity, education and the role it plays in democracy, education and how it fosters belonging, and also centering a joy of belonging for students and families, and just the spirit and power and joy that it brings. So today we're going to continue the conversation in a second with some remarks, and then also dive a little bit deeper into education and how it contributes to our place in the world, looking at national security, global competitiveness, also some conversations related to education and adapting to a changing climate. So thank you all so much for being here. And it's my pleasure to introduce the Assistant Secretary for the Employment and Training Administration of the Department of Labor, Mr. José Javier Rodríguez, please.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. So thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the work of the Department of Labor as it relates to your discussion, particularly today. So José Javier Rodríguez, I grew up in Miami, and just by way of a little bit of background in terms of what brings me here. So first of all, when we look at education and we look at economic opportunity, my mother was a nurse, right, until she retired. And she had a lot of great jobs, but it wasn't until she got a union job, sort of the latter half of her career, that she had the stability in her job and now has a dignified retirement. And with my father, so my father came here unaccompanied minor as a Cuban exile in a program called the Peter Pan program in the 1960s. And so his trajectory is really, he eventually, had a career in telecommunications, et cetera. But all the support networks that there were to make sure that he had the opportunity at education to really contribute and make the best of himself. So, and in my case, workers' rights, promoting workers' rights and promoting economic opportunity has been central to every part of my career. So it's an especial thrill to join at an administration that has prioritized both. I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible because there's a lot going on at the Department of Labor. So, when we're talking about education as a pillar of democracy, and we look at the work that the Department of Labor does, I look at it in sort of two ways that are sort of mutually reinforcing. One is that when we're talking about access to education and opportunity, that furthers democracy, right? But access to education opportunity is also a deliverable from democracy, right? And so our job, my full-time job is good jobs, right? To kind of simplify it. And I view that as delivering on democracy, right? Because that's what everyday people, that's what everyday people need. So I'm gonna hit three topics. One, just very granular and practical when we're talking about the shortage of teachers and paraprofessionals, central to a lot of what we're doing. Zooming out a little bit when we talk about access to education and opportunity. Again, broadly speaking, that's what we are delivering on. And the final thing is a lot of the work that this administration has been doing, with the acting secretary's leadership, has been making sure that workforce and education are a continuum, right? This is work that we're doing with Ed and with everybody across government, but that's essential. And so we work with, at the Employment and Training Administration, we work with community colleges. We work with states and local workforce boards with WIOA formula programs. We run Job Corps. We run a registered apprenticeship in partnership with so many. And it's about a good job and a path to economic opportunity. And the sort of four pillars that orient our approach at the Department of Labor to this work are, number one, making sure that we are not leaving workers behind, right? Whether that be based on geography, whether it's workers in rural communities, whether it's workers of color, whether it's women, across all our programs, making sure that those who are traditionally left out of a particular program or strategy are at the center of how we build that, continue to build that strategy out and scale up. It's not just jobs, it's real jobs that lead to careers and opportunities. So the key strategy here is that across all our programs, we are brokering and building partnerships with industry, right? That is the key intervention for us. It's not just training to get jobs and send folks out. We want to make sure that those are quality jobs. One area of particular focus as well is building a better care economy. So we have so from nursing, early care, mental health, again, with a focus on equity and on making sure that we are providing good jobs, right? And not just any jobs. And that's part of the reason why one of our focuses is on the care economy. And a final area of work, and sort of just zooming a little bit out in terms of what is orienting a lot of our work, is focusing on the future, right? There are so many aspects of our economy where we feel like trends are accelerating, right? It seems harder and harder for us to forecast what the workforce looks like, but we are doubling down on everything that we can do to build these pathways, to build these relationships, and as I said, particularly with industry. So for example, doubling down on registered apprenticeship as that pathway, right? Registered apprenticeship is the gold standard when it comes to earn and learn opportunities. We set a goal for fiscal year 2026 of having 1 million registered apprentices, and we are well on our way. I believe the most recent number is 832,000 registered apprentices right now, all over the country. And so that's one of the, just one example of the many things that we're doing. And another shameless plug for next week, we are going to have over 200 events all over the country lifting up youth apprenticeship. And it's Youth Apprenticeship Week. And as I mentioned, zeroing in on education as work as well, in 34 states and Puerto Rico, we have stood up registered apprenticeship programs in education for teachers and paraprofessionals. Just 2 years ago, there were only 2, right? So we are hard at work at trying to deploy again and deliver. So not only is this work with educators as workers about the teacher shortage, but it's also making sure that there are alternative pathways into these professions for those who aren't served by traditional education systems, right? And so registered apprenticeship is one of those tools that we use. So where there are shortages or where there are barriers in the traditional education system, for women, people of color, working parents, and many others, we are looking for strategies and how we can enhance those pathways. And so, continuing to talk about apprenticeship, we just recently announced $95 million in grants, right? And so not just in our work to make sure that we have as many pathways as possible for educators, but in all kinds of industries, manufacturing, healthcare, IT, infrastructure. And these strategies and investments, they only, in our workforce system, they only work if our workforce system is working hand in hand with education providers, right? So this is the making sure that we're not siloing workforce and education. So whether it is work that we are fostering along with our local workforce boards and other partners to work with high schools, non-traditional schools, career academies, community colleges, technical colleges, and even four-year institutions. It's part of a larger ecosystem, and trying to make sure that, and you may have heard this phrase, we are building the middle class from the bottom up and the middle out, right? But that really does infuse all of the work that we are doing and trying to make sure that workforce and education are not separate entities, but they are a continuum. So I hope that today's discussion goes well, and I look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you very much for letting me share a little bit about the work of the Department of Labor.
Well, thank you, Assistant Secretary Rodríguez. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next conversation in the panel, who would help us have it. So for our conversation about education and our place in the world, we have Allison Knox, the Senior Director of Education and Workforce Policy, and please feel free to take the stage. Dr. Eric Lin, the Interim Program Director for the CHIPS Research and Development, and Mary Catherine Riker, excuse me, Executive Director at Albert Schenker Institute. We're also joined by Alex Wagner, the Assistant Secretary for Manpower and Reserve Affairs at the United States Air Force. This conversation will be moderated by Naveen Nayak, Counselor, President, Center for American Progress Action Funds, Center for American Progress. A lot of titles, so a very, very distinguished panel. And so we just want to thank them for joining us and have this conversation today. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Jared. And really, thank you all. Really excited to really jump into the conversation. As folks can appreciate, if you could catch it from all the titles, Jared and the team were really thoughtful about how we put this panel together in terms of having this conversation about the impact education has in terms of how U.S. shows up in the world, how it shapes not only our economic, but also our national security policy, representation here from government, both on the civilian military side, from the private sector, sort of public sector, education backgrounds. And so really excited to tackle a challenge from multiple perspectives. And I think I do actually want to just start there, which is sort of getting everyone to sort of share, given your unique perspective, how you from where you're sitting sort of approach this question of how education is shaping our sort of economic and national security outlook. So I don't know if you want to start, Assistant Secretary.
Sure. Hi, I'm Alex Wagner. I'm the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. So that's a title that wasn't even intuitive to me when I worked in the Obama administration in the Pentagon itself. So let me tell you a little bit about what that is and then shift very briefly to why it matters. Effectively, I'm the Chief Human Resource Officer, the Chief People Officer of the United States Air Force and the United States Space Force. And you might look at me and say, oh, you don't look like you're in the military. And guess what? I'm not, because as educators know, and increasingly few Americans know, the military is run by civilians. And so I've got 700,000 airmen, guardians, civilians, and then another 250,000 of all of their husbands, wives, and children that I'm responsible for every single day. I am so glad the Assistant Secretary of Labor spoke about this continuum of education, because when I was growing up in Los Angeles, I had never met anybody that served in the military. Heck, I didn't even meet anyone who served in the military until after law school when I started practicing in Seattle, Washington. But what I can tell you is the military is not an alternative to education. It's really a pathway to education. And so let me just throw out a few quick stats before I stop talking and turn it over. Only 5% of our enlisted force comes in with any kind of degree. But if you stay 10 years and become a senior non-commissioned officer, over 50% will have a bachelor's, a master's, or in some cases, even a PhD. What does that mean? That means we have a highly educated force to work on some of the country's biggest technology challenges, whether it be in air, space, or taking care of all of these bespoke, highly challenging pieces of technology that we maintain, not only to protect Americans, but to work with our partners and allies. My biggest concern in focusing on national security is this increasing cultural gap between those who serve and those who don't, and the lack of understanding of military service and military life. And that's not a society problem. It's mostly an our problem. After 9/11, we built physical walls around military bases. We scaled down where we had bases to only certain areas of the country. And we made it harder to access. And we told our service members, don't wear your uniforms out for force protection reasons. And so when I was in high school in the early 90s, 40% of Americans had a parent that served. Today, that number is about 11% and dropping. So this increasing lack of familiarity has made it harder to understand all of the things and all the benefits of the United States military offers America. The education within the military for during service and then outside of service. And it imperils our national security. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today and be a part of this conversation.
Fantastic. And I do want to come back to some of those things afterwards, but please.
Sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate actually just your framing of coming from your background to this topic today. So I'm going to start in the same place. And actually, I want to get to something the Assistant Secretary said as well. So I'm the executive director of the Albert Shanker Institute, and we were founded just over 25 years ago to continue the priorities of Labor leader Al Shanker in strengthening public education, worker voice, and democracy. And we as an institute and I as an individual always get most excited when those things intersect. And they should intersect because when they intersect, they act as force multipliers, right? So when the Assistant Secretary said that education is a key deliverable of our democracy, I felt like that was that is the sentence for the day. And that is the sentence for this panel. This idea that a thriving public education system cannot function without a thriving democracy, and that both things require participation, that our democracy is strongest when we are participating in it, and our education is strongest when we are participating in it. And I know we're going to get to some of this later, but this idea of experiential learning and this idea of creating opportunities for young people to work, apprentice in their field, explore fields, participate in their democracy through experiential learning opportunities like action civics, as part of their education, not after their education or not sort of outside of their school day, but actually driving those experiences into their school day. It's a real opportunity to reform, remake public education. And it's a real opportunity for our students to engage, to have low risk ways of determining what it is they want to focus on, they want to study, they want to sort of do with the earliest years of their lives. And so I just want to take that phrase from the Assistant Secretary and work from it. This idea that education is really a key deliverable of our democracy, and to see like no sunlight between those two things.
Fantastic.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be on this panel. My name's Eric Lynn. I'm representing the Chips for America program in the Department of Commerce and through the National Institute of Standards and Technology. My background is as a researcher in almost all of my career. And NIST, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is one of the world's leading laboratories in the world. And so it was quite a big change to when the CHIPS and Science Act was passed, really focused on a very specific and very critical technology and industry in the United States, semiconductors, or chips for short. So coming from a researcher mindset, where our institution had really contributed to the growth of the industry that was invented in the United States, where the United States led still all the leading innovations for this industry, but the capacity to manufacture that technology in the United States was lost. And so when the CHIPS and Science Act was passed, then it is certainly an investment to bring more of that capacity back onto shore, for national security and economic security reasons. To do so, if you just try to look up and learn about how semiconductors are made, even as a scientist and researcher, knowing how it's done and knowing the chemistry and physics, it is still like magic. I still can't believe that we can make these devices at the scale and volume that we do, and the pace of innovation where it's pretty much completely changed every year and a half with billions of dollars of investment required. So as a policy to try to bring that manufacturing onto shore and to maintain our leadership in innovation, it's much, much more than just the investments into the facilities and into the science and the products. The entire Chips for America Act and in commerce at NIST is really centered on people. Innovation comes from human beings working together. They're executed with drive and support to be able to bring them to commercial scale. And as Secretary Raimondo likes to say, like with all the investments and the success of breaking ground into new facilities to the US already, it's math. That there are people who are needed to fill those jobs. There are skills that are necessary to be able to do them. There are opportunities for people in the United States who didn't know that this industry existed to be able to do so. So in the end, there's $52 billion for chips, the chips part of Chips and Science Act, and $50 billion of that has been charged to the Department of Commerce. Now, a lot of it is $39 billion is into incentives to bring and to subsidize the construction of manufacturing facilities here in the United States. And in the last 6 months or so, a lot of announcements have been coming out all across, spending billions of dollars with lots of announcements of just tens of thousands of jobs that are going to be created. There is $11 billion, and that's for myself on the R&D side, research and development side. And our mission is to make sure that the innovations that fuel the future of those facilities continues to be developed and deployed in the United States. Now, the full range of workforce that we need to cover all of this ranges from construction in the early phases, like right now, all the way to the innovators and who's going to build the companies of the future. And that whole continuum does form an ecosystem, very much as the Assistant Secretary and others have noted already. And so the target for the Chips for America Act is really to have two primary goals. The first one is to ensure that the investments that are being made in these facilities in the United States can be staffed, and are staffed with high-paying and high-quality jobs. And that we are also building an ecosystem to where we're inviting more people to participate in a career in semiconductor manufacturing and technology. Not only to fill positions that need to be filled, but also to stay in the industry. I mean, most of the founders of new technology industries in such a complex area like semiconductors are not straight out of school. You don't have enough experience to do so. They're really more mid-career people who have gained the experience and can understand how to make big differences in them, and they will need more training and more people to do so. And so an emphasis on an ecosystem and the education of the workforce, not just for K through 12, not just for high school, not just for PhDs, but the entire workforce overall, has now become like a centerpiece imperative in order to accomplish these larger industrial goals that we have. The last thing I'll say in TEP is that the energy from the industry, all the companies, academic institutions, government agencies, the energy has been really high. And the moment of true cooperation to try to solve these difficult problems in such a difficult technology space has been really amazing to see. And I think it's starting to pay dividends already, and it'd be exciting to see where it goes. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks. Why don't you start us off there?
First, I'm Allison Axum from Microsoft, and thank you, Cap, for inviting us to be here. To answer your question, I think that, and I think the company would agree, that a public education is a key ingredient to our democracy, and public-private partnerships are a way to also strengthen that democracy. So how do we show up in a public K-12 classroom? I think that it's important to ground any of my comments in the reality of actually our K-12 schools and community colleges in this country. For the last 10 years, Microsoft has run a program called TEALS. It's Technology and Education Literacy in Schools. In essence, it's teaching computer science, and we co-teach with teachers. And the co-teaching happens from over 7,500 different volunteers from about 500 different companies. And this is over 10 years' time. So we've actually now co-taught 100,000 students. 47% of them are in underrepresented groups. And most of those students have at least signaled an interest in going on in computer science or some sort of technology field all up. But of course, we also want them to go into literature or whatever they want to go into, but see that critical link of technology being part of their future. Another way that we've shown up in public education, which really speaks to my experience, is over the last 10 years in partnership with our program, we went out and said, what incentive should schools have from their states to actually offer computer science? And when you take computer science, should a student actually get credit, like a math or science credit toward high school graduation? Because what we were seeing is it wasn't even so much the students didn't have access to the course, but what we saw is that they didn't even want to necessarily take the course because it didn't count toward graduating. So we helped lead a campaign with nonprofits and coalitions across the country, including our great partner called Code.org. And when we started 10 years ago, only 13 states counted computer science as a math or science. And today I'm really glad to say all 50 do. But that is an example of how a company shows up in our classrooms, like understanding what teachers are facing right now, and then also showing up in our state capitals to find out what is on the thought, what are on the mind of our lawmakers when it comes to public education, and really walking our talk. I think part of the reason why I've been asked here today is because we are partnering in a new way with the AFL-CIO around AI and skills. But in addition to that, we're doubling down and partnering also with AFT. So I'm happy to share comments there. But I wanted to start by saying we're learning not just about K-12 education. In community colleges, we show up with cybersecurity education, we're not showing up to this conversation, not being grounded in the realities of our classrooms. And I think for all of us, that's just such an important aspect of the conversation.
Fantastic. And hopefully that just sort of introductory remarks gave everyone a feel for sort of the breadth and depth that everyone brings to this conversation, which, I'm excited to dive in and trying to think through ways to enter the conversation. So we'll try this a few different ways. First is just thinking through industrial policy. That's obviously been a huge priority for the Biden administration, both for its economic implications and for national security implications. Obviously, Dr. Lin, I'll start with you on this, but I think others have a lot of thoughts on this. And I want to come at this a few different ways. First, and you feel free to provide specific examples. I know, Allison, you have some of ways that this is fostering sort of new partnerships, private sector, public sector, or state, federal. I mean, there's really creating new opportunities, which are very exciting that we want to hear about. And then the other really is trying to sort of, this is an ambitious agenda to try to sort of reclaim, leadership role in innovation, in manufacturing. One of the biggest challenges is having the workforce and the skill set, not only for today and the needs immediately, but also for, the innovations yet to come. And so sort of getting folks to jump in here, I'll maybe start with you, Dr. Lin, but everyone's perspective on that challenge.
Yeah, thanks very much. We've been very busy this past year and a half in Chips for America. I'd say it echoes a lot of themes that the co-panelists have highlighted. The industrial policy part of it is bipartisan all over the country. There's a full agreement and understanding about the importance and need of such a critical technology that does touch everything we do and all other types of technologies, from AI to biotechnology and to even our commercial goods and automotive products. And so what's been really amazing is that it really is centered on naming the problem to be able to be really clear on what the objectives are. I think the administration and ourselves have done that pretty well. And then just the amount of partnership has really been critical to be able to try to meet those objectives, which are quite substantial. There's full agreement on how many jobs versus how many trained people there are. There's a humongous gap of hundreds of thousands of people. And so through that partnership lens, it really comes in several flavors. One is just catalyzing investment, a lot from the private industry, from states and other local governments. A second way is just leveraging successes somewhere in one place to be able to pull them into another place, or to combine strengths between private industry and perhaps an educational institution environment. And it also really comes down to trying to scale all of these best practices into a national scale. So in the catalyzing part, the amount of energy from classroom teachers and university professors, everyone's trying to do something. They all go to their schools trying to articulate the importance of STEM and the excitement of it. But it's all very fragmented, but it really is meaningful already. And then to leverage, if you look at the Chips for America deals that have been made with most recently Micron, Intel, TSMC, Samsung, and the rest, they are very clear, strongly articulated workforce programs. The Micron example, which was most recent, is a particular example, which included companies making commitments. There was a PLA working with AFT. There were already universities who haven't normally worked together to try to form a regional alliance in the New York State area. So that's one example, and every deal from the incentive side includes a program like that. And so those areas that are leveraging in skills, not only in New York State area with Micron and in Idaho with Micron, but an incredible amount of activity in the Ohio region with Intel. It's very similar dynamics, but tailored to that geographic area, in Arizona. Now, with that catalyzing part on the R&D side, we are also we're taking the longer point of view to sustain it, and also to think in terms of decades because of the nature of this industry. And so on the R&D side, we're taking those regional areas we're calling regional hubs for those workforce parts from the incentives deals, and we built a new organization called NatCast. NatCast is a purpose-built nonprofit, public-private partnership, where is going to be the focal point for all of the R&D activities, from resources to startups to setting the agenda for the research that we need to do. But one of their first activities that's articulated in our vision and strategy for this National Center for Semiconductor Technology is a workforce center of excellence. And the concept for that in that vision paper is not to directly create all those programs where the energy and leverage is already existing, but to bring all those parties together to identify which programs work best for this industry, how to scale it further for areas that are just in the early part of their journey as opposed to already having established industry. And so with that and the partnership with all of the stakeholders in this ecosystem, we're really hopeful and optimistic that all the energy that is present now can be channeled and refined and become a much more modern and forward-looking set of practices that can lead to the objectives that we wanted to reach.
Did you want to jump?
Yeah, because I'm really excited to sort of keep discussing this idea of both partnership and scale, because I think it's absolutely imperative that partnerships move us forward, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that in some of your examples. And quite frankly, Allison, you just gave us an example of scale, right? When you went from 13 states approving computer science as a math credit to all 50 states, that is an example of scale. And so I want to break that down a little bit, because I think that becomes an example of what you're seeing with Micron in New York as well, and what this sort of new model of education reform can be as well. Just so coming from an educator's perspective, that if we look at some education reform attempts in the last 10 or 20 years, and we diagnose sort of what about them stumbled, or what about them failed, or what about them were even dead on arrival, right? A lot of what we see, a lot of what they have in common is that they all approached sort of fixing public education from a deficit based. What don't people have? What do they need to be given? What do they need to be told how to do? What you hear in these examples are instead looking at the biggest problems we have to solve, certainly, and also looking for what are the assets the whole community brings. So I'll use the example of this partnership in this team teaching in computer science. So right now, I think there are very honest concerns about attendance, about chronic absenteeism. We really need to make sure that students are excited to come to school. They are engaged when they're in school, and that's where experiential learning and these opportunities come in. We also know, and when I was Commissioner of Education in Minnesota, I know that we had really struggled with the number of teachers licensed to teach computer science. Well, so you come at teachers who are dedicated to their students in their full-time jobs, and you come with these volunteers who have the technical expertise, and you're seeing some of this in career and technical education as well, with some of the flexibilities that states are offering in licensing individuals in career and technical education spaces. And then you say, how can we get these really engaging programs in front of students with the assets that our schools already have? And you come with that idea. And then on top of that, you say, okay, and what is a system set up that was set up for schools to be strong deliverers of that academic opportunity, right? And you look at state standards, and really it takes, you do not have to weaken standards. You do not have to sort of cut them back at all. You can actually just do a scan and say, so which math standards are being taught in these computer science classes in an applied way, right? Which gets back to this engagement, which suddenly creates this incredibly rich reform where everybody in the community wins, which is the way reform should work, right? Our students are more engaged. They also see more application, both to earning that high school diploma and or maybe some industry credentials at the same time. Our teachers feel valued for the role they have and that stability they have in their public education system. Our community partners, our industry partners see that they also bring valuable expertise, and they are also offering their expertise in a really productive way. And at the same time, our state can say, and at the same time, we have very high standards for meeting the academic needs of students in a safe and welcoming environment and a really engaging environment. And so I look at that, just breaking down that example, I think becomes that way of walking through what the sort of most successful education reforms of the 21st century starting now are going to look like. And to your point about bringing up Micron, I think you are seeing the same thing, right? You are seeing an education system that was really dedicated to rethinking how they could better meet the needs of students, better engage students. And so from the pre-K-12 system, from the higher ed system, you saw partners, and then you saw Micron also say, so let's work from those assets you are bringing pre-K-12. Let's work from the assets you are bringing higher ed in New York. Let's work from the assets that the labor community in New York is bringing. And here's how we're going to match up with those assets to really that is a story that is exploding for all the right reasons, because I think you can, if you study how this program is growing in New York, I think, again, you get some of those same building blocks for how we are going to strengthen public education, create real learning opportunities for our students, and partner with our community, with industry at the same time.
That's great. I really like that reframing from deficit to assets. I don't know, Allison, if you want to jump in on the AFT partnership you just sort of referenced earlier here.
I need to start with this. I liked Mary Catherine before today, but after that, now I really like Mary Catherine. No, I mean, this flywheel you're talking about, I also want to bear down on one term, which is it took 10 years. I mean, we got to stick with things for the long haul. And so these regional hubs, we applaud the work that's going on the ground, and we're trying to show up in helpful ways. And we also know this is going to take some commitment over time. And part of the reason why I just share that is because I feel like we are starting yet a new journey at the company. It started on December 11th when the president of AFL-CIO, Liz Schuler, took the stage with our president, Brad Smith, and we were over at the AFL-CIO building here in Washington, D.C., and we pledged to partner together. And people used terms like, this is a historic moment, all those kinds of things. It's a new way of thinking and working for both entities. It's new. We have to stick with it for 3 to 5 years at least. But let me just tell you a little bit about why, what it is, and then just a teeny bit about why. The what. First, we committed as a company that any employee, we have 221,000 employees, any employee, if they want to join a union, we will stay neutral. So we are committed to neutrality. And then in addition to that, we are going to be sharing as much information about the revolution, excitement around AI, trends, data, tools with the AFL-CIO through especially their Tech Institute as possible. We are bringing in more worker-centered principles, design principles as we look at our technology. And then finally, we're exploring joint policy and additional research efforts. So this is a big commitment for both entities, and we are learning about each other's cultures, the way that we do work, and it's pretty exciting. With the American Federation of Teachers in particular, I just want to share one quick story. I think that it'll explain the power of this kind of partnership. When we started AI, really moving ahead with AI about a year ago in January, I was asked to put together roundtable discussions with all kinds of stakeholders, including teachers. And I had in one of my groups, and all we did was talk about like, what gets you excited about this? What makes you concerned about it? And let's experiment with the technologies. And so one of my groups had a elementary school principal, and she came to the roundtable and she took me aside and said, I just want you to know, just before we even start, I'm never allowing anything AI in my school, and my teachers will not be using it. And, you know, we are super new at the whole journey, and I want to validate anybody who's going to come to our roundtable. So I said, that's totally fine. Come sit down. So we had the conversation. At the very end, I said, by the way, because I had one of the chats open, and I said to the principal, you know, is there anything during the week that you really don't like doing? You know, and she said, but you won't tell anyone. Of course, now I'm telling everybody, but you don't know who it is. And I was like, just whatever. And she said, every Thursday night, I face writing a parent newsletter. I have to talk about some of the, you know, learning objectives we've met. I have to talk about, like, if it's Black History Month, what we did with Black History. She's like, and every Thursday night, I just don't want to do it. So I said, well, why don't you just tell me some things? So I put it in this, you know, it's the free Bing chat, right? The AI. So I'm putting it in, and I say to it, you know, just create parent newsletter, elementary school level. And on the screen, there comes the newsletter, right? And she looks up at the screen, and in front of everyone, she says, I need that tomorrow. So I went from a person who said, absolutely not, all the way to, I'm ready to try it. And for me, it was just an indicator of like how much work we have to do to demystify some of these tools, how much work we have to do to like get on the same plane, you know, language, and what does AI even mean? And with AFT as a great partner, I think we're going to get there further faster.
That's fantastic story. Obviously, these investments in the industrial policy do have real national security implications. Part of the reason we're doing it, given sort of global challenges. But I want to specifically have you, Assistant Secretary, speak to the sort of investments the Air Force is making specifically around tackling sort of the complex world we face. And then I do, while you have the mic, pick up on this question of how you are trying to close the gap between that you mentioned that I think is worth the audience hearing you talk more about, how you are trying to close the gap between the military and civilian sort of workforce.
Right. Well, since this is a K-12 and a higher ed panel, I'll start with higher ed and then I'll move to K-12. Many of you might have scratched your head with my opening comments when I noted that somehow within 10 years of serving full-time in the military, 5% of folks with degrees went to 50% of bachelor's and master's and PhDs. And oh, by the way, 95% of sub-degree. And the story for that starts with the largest community college in the world, called the Community College of the Air Force. So everybody who comes in to the Air Force or Space Force is enrolled. Over the course of your service, and again, this is not only a nice to have, this is not only a workforce development issue, this is a national security issue, because we've got to invest American citizens. And by the way, the largest employer in America is still the United States military, with the education to succeed not only professionally, but also in our civic life and our body politic. And by the way, that degree that you earn through service doesn't go away after you leave service. You can take that and build on that. And there are a number of other benefits. During service, you can get tuition assistance up to $4,500 per year. After service, you can get the post 9/11 GI Bill. It pays for books, it pays for housing, it pays for tuition, it pays for all these other things. And if you want, you can transfer it to your kids. So again, the military is not an alternative to education. It's a pathway. What frightens me and what I noted before is this growing civil military divide. And so working from higher education to K-12, I oversee a program that many of you have probably heard of. Many of you probably don't know a lot about because frankly, I didn't. It's called the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps. Now, in high schools across America, and the Air Force has 840 or so, high school kids who don't have to be the best athlete, who don't have to be the best singer, know how to play an instrument, can come in with almost no background and experience and find a community, right? Be a part of a team. Learn civics. Boy, what's missing today? I mean, when I think about the biggest national security threats right now, it's not what other countries are planning to do to us on a battlefield, whether it be on ground, in the air, in sea, in cyberspace. It's how they're tearing us apart as a nation. And they're tearing us apart as a nation because we have backed off from civic education. Well, that's what JRTC teaches. It teaches basic civics. It teaches how government works and often how government should work. And yet it's called JROTC. And yet it has absolutely nothing to do with officers or reserve officers in particular. And so we're working right now with the Congress to think about how to rebrand this, because this isn't, by the way, a recruiting program. In fact, only about 7% of high school students that come through JROTC, Air Force JROTC, end up assessing into either our ROTC programs, the U.S. Air Force Academy, or enlisting. So we are mandated to do this and run this program by Congress in order to fill this civics gap. And I want to, as I said earlier, find a way to partner with higher education, with K through 12 educators to fill this civics gap, to better understand all the things the military can do. Because right now, what's happening and what's my biggest challenge? We don't know how to talk about ourselves to anyone except ourselves. And I'll give you an example. And sorry for being a little interactive here, and I'll close with this. Does anyone in the audience, and just raise your hand, if know what I'm talking about when I say, did the Codel take Millair? One person. Okay, a handful of people, but not many. I didn't either when I started in the Pentagon at the beginning of the Obama administration in 2009. But 25,000 people work across the river in the Pentagon, and I guarantee you every single one of them understands that. We speak a different language. The answer to that question is, did the congressional delegation, members of Congress, fly somewhere on a military airplane? The most basic of acronyms that we use seamlessly, and we don't think for a second if anyone understands us. So as I said, we've got to do a better job of talking about ourselves, but we really need partners who are interested in learning. And so that's why I'm throwing out some of these fun facts that you might not know, because I didn't know. And yet it is such an integral part, not only of our body politic, not only of our civics, not only of this next generation. We can talk about the schools and the Q&A that the Department of Defense runs, that the school districts and the local educators that I'm constantly meeting with to make sure that education is up to par, public education for our service members, not so they can only have great education, but so they can focus on their jobs and their kids are taken care of. Oh,
This mic just died.
so I'll close with that. But again, this is a national security imperative.
I'll see your military acronyms and I'll raise you education acronyms.
Yes, there's no shortage of acronyms, unfortunately. I actually do want to pick up on a thread and pull in the other panelists on, which has come up a few times. You know, we're in this weird moment where there's obviously a desire to make greater investments in the U.S. in the sense that we have, overlooked investing in America and have outsourced a lot. And yet that also comes with a real thread of isolationism, a real thread of not necessarily, wanting to engage with the world in the same ways. And, we talked earlier in the green room, Dr. Lynn, that, with the focus on certain job training or STEM, it crowds out the ability to teach civics and to actually how to think about this balance between both, the professional needs and sort of the investments we do have to make without taking us down a path that, ignores civics or, isolates us from what is still a very interdependent world. I'm curious to get folks' thoughts on that challenge.
Well, I can start, if that's okay. It's a very difficult challenge overall because of how much, I think the main issue is thinking of okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Out screen now, see how it goes. Is really thinking about education just within a fixed period of time is one challenge. So one of the way we think about education of finishing, like famously in STEM, it's like if you haven't chosen STEM by 7th grade, then you're lost. And so that's like thinking about a fixed point in time that might be backed with some evidence today. But because things are more complex, the world's more complex, how do we have conversations with groups that we don't normally have conversations with that are really important? That takes a much longer viewpoint about education and training and workforce. And not only between STEM and non-STEM, just even within STEM disciplines, the range of science breadth you need to be able to navigate into being a productive citizen, as well as how to build new technology, is not really possible within the current model of what we think about in education. So that's one place to start.
I'll jump in to go back to scale, and that is we really need to scale experiential learning. And I listened to the junior ROTC program, and that is experiential learning in our schools. I think of the cybersecurity programs being started, and that is experiential learning. You think of the programs where learning by doing is a core piece of the program. And certainly his career and technical education always has been, but so has music. So has the arts programs, theater programs, physical education. Those programs, there are experiential learning sort of masters among us in education we can be learning from, so that as an English teacher or a math teacher, a science teacher, as a computer science teacher, no matter what, as a social studies teacher, we can and should be infusing more experiential learning into our school day. Can you learn about pH in water from a book? Yeah, you probably can. But if you decide to do the pH testing on the river or the pond by your school or in your community, what else are you learning besides pH levels, right? What are you learning about the environmental quality of your community? What are you learning just in traveling from your school to that area where you're conducting water quality testing about your community? What questions get brought up to your teacher that then go to your social studies class and say, why when we crossed from this part of the community to this part of the community, well, that sounds like a great experiential learning opportunity and action civics opportunity for your school. And again, when I was commissioner, I had the opportunity to work with a group of math teachers in Minnesota who were using the statistics from their city to apply to state math standards. And so they weren't just learning, again, can you learn percentages from a textbook? You actually can. However, when you're looking at the percentages of your actual neighbors, how many renters versus homeowners are there in this community? Let's compare the renters and homeowners in this community. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you want to do with those numbers? What questions do you now have that now go to your English teacher because you've decided that you're going to write a letter to your city council member? And I'm going to use the state standards in English language arts to make sure that we are helping you write a meaningful letter to ask those questions you have of your city council member. So experiential learning sort of does those things, again, back to that statement that education is a key deliverable of our democracy. When we engage our students, when that learning is engaged, when that, again, that learning, that the real model of that around career and technical education is then applied into other subject areas, that learning comes alive. It's incredibly meaningful. Questions lead to investigations, which sounds a lot like the scientific method. And next thing you know, your students are taking themselves on their own journey, and it's meaningful. And it is not sort of something they get ready to use in the real world. Learning is the real world for them.
I get so engrossed with what people are saying. I'm like, oh, right. I have to say something. One of the Microsoft has been also trying to focus on rural populations in the United States in particular. We have had partnerships with the 4-H, National 4-H and FFA. Part of, we believe, bringing civics to life and more experiential education is for us to bring our core competencies and our technologies to all kinds of groups. Again, this idea of partnership leading to better democracy, we try to really engage there. So I think it's been 7 years, a partnership with both of those entities. But I just wanted to give an example of how I see it making a difference with rural students. So we've partnered with FFA. We have this kit. It's called a Farm Beats Kit for Students. It was just highlighted yesterday at the White House STEM Opportunity Program. I don't know how many of you were there. The kit is it's a microbit that you plug into your computer, but then there's a sensor that you put in the soil of a plant. And this is part of the curriculum, a CTE curriculum that all ag science students go through. And the teachers have been really eager to engage with technology and also make those students feel like they belong in the technology world so that also those jobs potentially could stay in their communities, right? Because through better internet access and digital equity, we can make sure that more jobs stay in their hometowns. Anyway, so the sensor goes into the ground and it feeds the information into the microbit, which is plugged into your computer. And I think we just gave like 2,000 laptops to FFA for this purposes to make sure that more students could do this. But anyway, the data of the quality of the soil, how much moisture is there, how nutrient rich, I'm not exactly sure how the sensor does all this, feeds into the microbit. Then all of a sudden the student can play with the data through different operations and forms. And there's standardized curriculum that's free for any student across the United States. You can look up Farm Beats for students if you're interested. But the whole idea is to make sure that, again, we're meeting the teachers where they're at because they already have to meet these standards, right? So we should be, as a company, sensitive to what the teacher already faces, make sure that we are providing things like resources that help map and support them so that it is already mapped to all the standards. The training lifts up the teacher and the student. We're doing it through FFA, who we all know have blue coats and are in every county in our country. How do we, again, show up in partnership and share the limelight, share the highlight when something great happens? And hopefully all of these students will learn more about data science, and potentially AI through a curriculum that they already have a vested interest in. So it's just an example.
That's great. And both your comments there sort of is a good reminder of how much education fostering a sense of agency is such an important part of actually creating that sort of engagement in democracy and that vibrancy, which is great. I do have a last question, but I think I might open it up to the audience first and then come back to all of you for some closing thoughts. So my colleague Billy is in the room with a mic. If anyone in the audience has a question, please let us know. Raise your hand. Yes, up front here.
Hi, Paige Shoemaker-DeMio. I'm on the K-12 team here at CAP, so thanks for being here. We obviously know that technology is really important for students to understand how to use when they're getting ready to enter the workforce in this day and age. Also incredibly important for national security and competitiveness. And you kind of spoke to us a little bit with rural students, but I'm curious to know, we have a digital divide when it comes not only to physical access to technology, but also access to well-designed curriculum, teachers who are well-trained in that curriculum, and also just regular use of the technology. So I'm curious to know if you have any ideas of opportunities to close that divide and create more opportunities for all students there.
I look at everyone. It's a great question. And in fact, I just heard a new term with AI being on top of the existing digital inequities. Now people are starting to talk about double digital inequities, the double digital divide. And as a technology company, we've been, I think your question in essence is, what are the resources that teachers and students can tap into that already exist to help bridge that divide? And I've given a couple examples, and we're doing more in specific states. So we have a program called TechSpark, and we have full-time employees who only do community engagement and lift up opportunities for more teachers. Because we also know in especially rural areas, there's a lot of driving involved to actually get to the schools, and showing up in communities is key to building trust. So we have these full-time employees in certain states, and we try to then, through them, bring as many opportunities from the company, because the company, my gosh, Minecraft is just a great example. Most students love Minecraft, but a lot of people won't access it. The teacher doesn't even know that they can access it in various ways, and that students love it until like a person from their community shows up and talks with them about it, and so we do it through that particular program. There's a multitude of ways that we've been working on internet access for all. I was very much a part of the digital equity sort of advocacy and the Digital Equity Act, and we want to do more there. There's so much work to be done, though, frankly, that we're always open to new ideas and new partnerships.
I'd really appreciate your question. And I think it gives us an opportunity to think, like, what could be the barriers included, so we absolutely should talk about infrastructure barriers, right? And just like which communities are wired and which communities are not yet wired. And then what sort of access they do have, and what sort of access they need. And so those are all valid things, but I want to zero in on the point you made about, teachers not being invested in and not having the time. Like, what are those barriers? And first, thinking of, there's just a finite amount of time for professional learning. And why is that? Like, why do we have a 20th century or even a 19th century day for students and teachers when we have 21st expectations of them both, right? And so we need to rethink. And if we are going to reform the school day and the school year, to make sure that we are embedding regular, high quality professional learning times so that teachers can partner with community experts, they can become experts themselves and that sort of thing. That's going to take an entire community approach, because one of the reasons teachers traditionally have limited professional learning time is that the community counts on teachers to house their students as well as teach them, right? The physical building of a school, it's one of the things, again, when I was commissioner and we were moving everyone from in-person instruction to remote instruction at the very beginning of the pandemic, one of the concerns was, where are students going to go if their parents were like essential workers, first responders, others, and so like, thinking about how we had to sort of radically rethink the way we deliver education at that moment, I believe we have to radically rethink the way we make sure in this rapidly changing time, in this time where, access to information doubles, I don't know, every 6 months or so. And like, how are we making sure that we are continuing to invest in our educators in a way that isn't breaking them and breaking our profession, and in a way that is also really mindful, like how are the other ways the community can step up to make sure students are cared for while teachers are getting that professional development? Or are there these ways of team teaching so that there's like teachers are learning by doing as well while we're meeting the needs of students, right? I think there are a variety of options, but I think breaking down what is keeping us from getting to that place and then what do we have to radically rethink to get to that place then is a really important answer to your question.
If I could just follow up really
Yeah, go
quickly
ahead.
on that, is that I think I agree with that. That's a very real challenge of the complexity of the world versus the point of where a human being is trying to do the best they can. The experience in the last year and a half with Chips for America is that since there's so much attention and so much easier understanding of how important semiconductors are to our everyday lives, that it is really driving at least a focal point to try to at least address this challenge within this specific area. And so I think those communities in Ohio, New York, Arizona, and many others have really learned about how to really target a very clear objective and a very shared idea to find solutions to some of these challenges, both resources as well as what can help a human being reach others. And so this might be an example as a learning vehicle for other types of topics. Maybe it's AI, that would be already underway, very important, or any other foundational technology. It might be industrial biotech for rural communities, for example. And so that might be a learning model for what could work if there is some focused attention to try to address these gaps.
Great. Billy, give
We have one question from our online audience. I'm going to paraphrase because it's a little long. They're asking you to comment on opportunities for continuing education or re-education, specifically focusing on tech in both rural communities and with military families.
Sure. I'll focus on military families and continuing education. As I noted, the GI Bill, which you can earn, I believe, around 90 days of service, will qualify you. And then if you get out through a medical discharge or retirement, you can earn these benefits. You can pass over to your dependents. But we're also focused on making sure the schools that surround our military installations are high quality schools, because the workday often isn't a 9-to-5 workday when you're wearing a uniform. And so the Department of the Air Force is the only service to put out what we call our education scorecards. And we rank every single school within a certain distance from our Department of Air Force installations, not objectively, but subjectively compared to all of the other installations. And what I can tell you is it's a conversation starter. Nobody wants to be red. Most people don't want to be yellow, and everybody wants to be green. And so I have community leaders. I've got mayors. I've often have governors and state senators come to me and say, what can we do to change the law to resource these schools better? We've also created incentive programs. So if you put in place a number of intentional outreach, you're able to earn what's known as a Purple Star School status. And so those are recognized. And I know the First Lady recently had an event talking about Purple Star Schools. So the continuum of education, focus on high quality schools and technical education is something that is not only a requirement to make sure that we're taking care of our service members and their families, but it's really is an imperative to make sure they're focused on the mission and not worried about their families.
I just want to say that we offer many, many online free courses through LinkedIn. And we have new course pathways that are available focused on AI, productivity in AI, generative AI, and the pathway has like 6 to 7 courses and then an exam. You get a certification, it automatically populates onto your LinkedIn profile. So one of the ways that we feel that we're sharing resources with any community, any person, frankly, all over the world, is by making sure that the content is really high quality, but it's online and it's free so that anybody can access it, which I think is really critical, especially as we move forward with AI.
LinkedIn Learning's been great. Any other questions? Okay, any in the audience? I'm going to close on this. So just sort of in the shift from deficits to assets. Maybe starting, Allison, with you and coming down, just an asset that you see as a real opportunity that if we keep investing in it, sort of meet these challenges, whether it is around global competitiveness or sort of, meeting these complex challenges from a national security perspective, you'd want to see us really double down, whether it's from a public policy perspective or the private sector, something you're excited about that we should be investing in.
I would really love to see more groups asking huge corporations to do more. And part of what I think we could do more of is both balance our programmatic offers with more of our advocacy on clear issues that we collectively want to make progress on. And so when you meet with a company to talk about really important issues like how do we strengthen public education to ensure that our democracy gets stronger, I just encourage everybody to actually ask more of all of our entities. So and just as an example, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, what's my follow-up? I'm going to learn more about the military infrastructure and all of those schools and all of that education, because we should be showing up and partnering more with you. And when we meet, I hope that even if our worlds, we don't see if we're going to talk about democracy, we got to walk it, right? If we don't always see eye to eye on everything, first off, I hope you ask us to do more, and I'll ask the same, but that we can agree to disagree, be civil, and model the kind of world that we're trying to, I think, inspire in our schools. So I hope that's helpful.
Fantastic.
For me, for Chips for America, we're really excited about the Semiconductor Workforce Center of Excellence that is going to be stood up in the next several months. An outline of that vision is in our NSTC vision strategy paper from last spring. And it really is trying to scale all of these different practices with a concentration on this foundational technology. And so it's going to be convening all the major semiconductor industries, those that received incentive funds as well. And they've already started building like regional hubs. And so we can convene all those parties in together into the Center of Excellence. It's not just for academics and companies, it's also between governments. And so we're working very closely with DoD programs of many kinds that have been quite successful as well as all the full range of NSF programs that are certainly been dedicated to STEM education for more than 50 years. And so there's a chance to be able to convene all those parties together and charge the center collectively to identify what works best. And if we do this very well, I think there'll be a lot of ideas. Semiconductors is not unique completely in its complexity in terms of the future, its impact on our future. And I believe that's like a very different mode to how to think about these different places where you may not know what's going on in a different arena. There are certainly already disagreements on what's the best way forward, and that might be okay depending upon the region and locality that you're in. And so all of those ideas, I hope, will be leading to many different types of investments, different kinds of policies. And I very much appreciated that we, in science especially, as well as teaching, we do a lot of things that are from the 19th century still in approach, and we are certainly in a 21st century world.
Happy to be your learning partner then. So maybe not unsurprisingly, I am going to say the assets we need to make sure we listen to, invest in are our students and our teachers. When I was president of my local teachers union in St. Paul, Minnesota, when I wanted to figure out how our contract could be a vehicle that better diversified our teaching force and like better sustained the teaching profession, I actually spent time asking our teachers of color and our Indigenous teachers, what was your path to teaching? Why did you come into teaching? What keeps you in teaching? To listen for what our contract should then reflect. Then I asked students, who are the teachers you deserve? And I listened for what they were saying. And we built contract language to negotiate with our district from there. Right now, we have there is a teacher shortage. It's real. We have the teachers have professional learning needs that we've identified here, you've identified in the audience, and our students are identifying, our teachers themselves are identifying. I mean, we have thousands of teachers every month engaging on a platform called Share My Lesson, which was started by AFT as a free platform for teachers to share information, to share lesson plans, to share professional learning. They're doing all of this right now in the margins of their lives. And so we are not going to solve a teacher shortage by continuing to ask the teachers already in our classrooms to continue to do this work they're hungry for in the margins of their lives. And at the same time, our students and our teachers just went through a fairly radical transformation. They had to radically rethink things. They had to be more student-centered than ever before in their lives. And we need to find those things that were successful, that they did, that they want to do more of, that they should not do more of. And so if you have current classroom teachers right now, chances are really good they have some ideas for not only how to solve the teacher shortage because they've determined that they're still in teaching. They probably have some ideas for how to make it a more sustainable, a more welcoming profession, a more engaging profession, and at the same time, make learning more engaging for our students at the same time that can really address a lot of what our partners on this at the stage said at the same time.
So one of the reasons why I was so thrilled to be invited and included on this panel today is not only because as a former teacher at law school professor, this is near and dear to my heart, but it's because I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about just how fundamental K through 12 education is, not only to the United States and our big national security, but a well-functioning military whose service and focus is both on deterrence, but it's also in creating a stronger body politic here at home. And I'll just close with a very quick story. Many years ago, not many, less than 5 or 6 years ago, the Congress created a commission on national, military, and public service. And one of their biggest takeaways was that Americans today, young Americans today, are increasingly not socialized to resolve conflicts in an interpersonal way. And that lack of socialization, which has been grown increasingly because they're behind devices and communicating not in person, but online and digitally, has resulted in people who don't know how to solve simple things in the workplace. And so America's employers are suffering. I think this is an area where the military can fill a real gap, and where this National Commission said that private sector employers today are looking to the military to fill a gap. You know, we take from all over America in every community. And not only do we bring people in and teach them skills, and you know, you can be a teacher, you can be a nurse, you can be a police officer, you can be a scientist in the military, you can be a lawyer and actually practice law instead of do document review in your first few years. But most importantly, what the military teaches is leadership skills. And so for those K through 12 educators and administrators, think about how hiring someone with military service can help teach leadership skills and resolving interpersonal problems in your school, because fundamentally that's what's going to contribute to getting our country back on track and healing not only this lack of familiarity with the military, but really healing and helping people work out some of these increasingly partisan disagreements in a civil way.
That's fantastic. What a great place to stop. And I want to just thank all of our panelists for thoughtfulness and also the ways you've been able to connect across the different kind of work you're all doing in this space. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks again to our wonderful panel for your insights from the conversation. Just a few quick instructions for our next session. We'll move into our breakouts. For our discussion on a strong education system is our best defense. That'll be in Events East, which is the room right behind us. Our leveraging education and workforce to drive U.S. global competitiveness conversation will be here in this space. And then we'll have strengthening our education system with data and Chesapeake Room upstairs. If you have any questions, please see a CAP staff member with a blue badge on. I'm not wearing my blue badge. So I don't know what I pointed at. But thank you all. And we'll see you there in your rooms at 11:15. So thank you.
ahead and get started on this panel. I will tell you, I've been excited for this conversation now for some time. I'm really looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say, because I think this is a really important topic, talking about sort of the role of education and its link to sort of our competitiveness globally. I don't want to spend a ton of time on introductions. Each of these folks extremely impressive. So I will just go very quickly through. At the end, Sarah Kemp is Vice President of International Government Affairs at Intel. Point of fact, Sarah and I worked together at the Commerce Department for a long time. Sarah is a friend, a mentor, one of my favorite bosses. So take it for what it's worth. Michelle Burris is from the Century Foundation. She helps lead their work on industry and inclusion. And Carrie Warwick Smith, to my right, is Vice President of Public Policy at the Association of Community College Trustees. Let's just jump right into the conversation. I'll throw a question open to the group or to an individual, and then I'd welcome the group to weigh in if you have other thoughts. Sarah, I'll start with you. One of the things that we've seen over the last decade, and certainly accelerating going forward, is a change in the way industry produces products, whether it's digitalization, AI, Industry 4.0. How can we make sure that our workforce is empowered and also competitive enough to take advantage of some of these technology changes?
It's a great question. And I would say, in addition to that, we're seeing an increase in the competition for talent worldwide. Just in semiconductors alone in the US, for Intel alone, we're about 87,000 people short just for our investments. The industry as a whole is about 300,000 short. So this is a real talent war or talent crisis, but it's also global. And I think there's three key ingredients. One is partnership. You've heard that from the other panels, but I'll just double down. It has to be a partnership with governments, with educational institutions, with communities, as well as with private sector. We have to make sure that we include inclusiveness and accessibility, because as AI moves forward and as we use AI in the workforce, there's going to be a greater digital divide if we do not address that, and address it in K through 12, right? Address it at a very early age. Address it in things like, do our kids have smart learning laptops? Because if they don't, we can't unleash the power that AI can offer. But we also have to start with demystifying for everyone, not just students, not just workforce, for government officials, for society as a whole. And we have to ensure that there's a huge emphasis on ethics and responsible AI as it relates to AI. But in general, I look at what's happening around the world, and I look at what other governments are doing. And again, whether it's Malaysia has offered a 10-year income tax-free holiday for anyone who meets the criteria to work in semiconductors and other industries that they're trying to promote. Or Singapore, that is doubling down on the individual account for training for every single citizen to retrain, because the gap is growing in how fast you have to refresh your skills. So how do we encourage not only the students, but how do we encourage workers to be retrained? So I'll just stop there, but.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it sort of raises the idea too of changing the way we talk about the scale of the challenge, right? And raising maybe our own ambition. Michelle, can I go to you next? I'm curious if you have any sort of state level examples. I know you work a lot with the states that could serve as sort of a model for a national level strategy to sort of do this better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you to the Center for American Progress for the opportunity. Good morning, everyone. There are 3 states and 1 country that I would like to highlight specifically. But before I do that, I do want to point to a report that MIT did that is titled The Lost Einsteins. And they found that innovation would quadruple. It would quadruple if we brought more communities of color, women, and people from economically disadvantaged communities into innovation spaces. So I do want to start with that. And one of the states that is helping to bring more people in is the state of Ohio. In Ohio, I'm very proud to partner with them through an industry and inclusion program, which is a national learning community to bolster the success of workers of color and women in manufacturing. And in Ohio, they are doing a really phenomenal job to close the semiconductor talent gap and to get their students competing globally. So with Intel having a facility in New Albany, Ohio, Lorain County Community College is just one of the 8 colleges who received a $50 million award from Intel. And an interesting thing about Lorain is that they were already offering degrees in semiconductor and microelectronic magnetics education 10 years before the CHIPS and Science Act. So they were already forward thinking about how to be globally competitive. They were also the first community college to ever offer credentials in microelectronics magnetics to get us globally competitive. So anyone from the ages of 16 to 60 years old can enroll in these semiconductor programs and be willing to be globally competitive. The outcomes are 9,000 manufacturing jobs, and over 2,300 students can access scholarships to be able to enroll into these programs. There are also internships available where they can intern and learn more about semiconductor processing. These are very diverse students, some who come in with 0 years of experience in semiconductor, and particularly at Lorain County Community College, there is a 100% placement rate for graduates. When I went out to visit, I met and engaged with a student named Paul. Paul is an African-American male student, and although there's not a lot of accessible transportation in that part of Ohio, he has family support to bring him to school, and he is now completing his last year in the microelectronic MEMS program. He's had 2 internships, and now he's on his way to either go work at Intel or NASA upon graduating. And so students like Paul are more students that we need. I also want to spotlight a group called Magnet in Ohio, in Northeast Ohio. They are a nonprofit and a community-based job training center, and it is a $18 million facility located directly across the street from a primarily African-American housing community. And they are providing high-tech manufacturing training, and they are reversing industrial decline. They also provide transportation for students to the workforce training facility. They place them in internships like Lincoln Electric. And so they are thinking how to leave no one behind when we think about education fostering belonging. The second state I want to highlight is New York, particularly in the Syracuse area. Onondaga Community College and Syracuse University just implemented a direct transfer admission agreement. And this is important because this means that anyone who has a 3.0 or higher and wants to pursue a semiconductor path or a globally competitive occupation, they now get directly accepted. And this is important because for me as a former community college student, I know how it can be difficult to sometimes transfer your credits from community college to a four-year university. The second thing that's important is if you have a 3.25 or higher, you come in with a $10,000 scholarship. And so those financial barriers are limited for you to be able to be in these occupations. There's also a CHIPS camp, and this is a partnership with Micron and the schools in Onondaga, which is a multi-day event to teach students the importance of STEM. They are at middle schools, they're at the community colleges, and they are also tailored for young women as well, called Girls Gone Tech, because as we heard earlier, the interest in STEM drops at the teenage years for young girls. And so gauging that interest is really important. And then the Manufacturing Institute found that if we can increase women just by 6% in manufacturing, we can have 800,000 employees. The last state I want to highlight is the state of Alabama. In Alabama, there are 8 historically Black community colleges, and despite them being very underfunded, they are continuing to thrive and produce globally competitive students. One of those colleges is Bishop State Community College, located in Mobile, Alabama. 64% of students do not go to college, 64%. So they are outreaching to those students. They just opened a new advanced technology center, and they're upskilling students in manufacturing, shipbuilding, and in aviation. Another program I want to highlight is the Federation for American Education, also known as FAME, which is a globally competitive workforce development apprenticeship, primarily in the southeastern parts of the US, where students spend time in 2 days in the classroom and the remainder of days in industry. It It's debt-free, so students are graduating without any student debt. And at Bishop State Community College, there is a 100% placement rate. And so these 3 states are thinking about how to be globally competitive and how to make America the manufacturing capital of the world. As I mentioned, there is one country I do want to highlight, and that country is Germany. A year ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Germany to study their apprenticeship model and to engage with students. And my 2 takeaways would be the career pathways and the job quality. Since the 1960s, Germany has had a very uniform process of their apprenticeships. It is part of the national fabric, it's part of the economic and social fabric of the country. So just imagine in 8th grade, already knowing what you want to do. And in 10th grade, it's formalized through a contract process of where you're going to be spending your apprenticeship. The majority of apprentices actually end up staying at that company and seeking mobility throughout their career. Students are able to have global opportunities. I spoke with one student. He was an apprentice at BMW in Germany. He also came to South Carolina, the South Carolina facility, and had an apprenticeship training there at BMW. And 52% of the population, the student population, is an apprentice or is a part of that dual vet program. And they can choose from over 300 occupations. So when we think about the job quality as well, just thinking about in 10th grade, you know what you're going to do. You know how much you're going to make throughout your entire career. You know your vacation days. You know your wages. And you have the support of industry, unions, employers, and sometimes family. And so employers see this as a social responsibility. Germany sees this as contributing to the national economic growth. And throughout these 3 states and the country of Germany, we have to realize that talent is ubiquitous, opportunity is not. And so here in America, we have to think about how do we broaden those opportunities so that we can be more globally competitive and indeed be the manufacturing capital of the world.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great line about talent being ubiquitous and opportunity not. I'll go to Carrie next. Certainly, we've heard about sort of the role of industry working with technical schools, community colleges. That's a huge part of sort of making sure the workforce is kind of ready to take on the challenges of work these days. Same sort of question to you. I mean, are there models here that are useful? Where have you seen sort of industry and the community college programs around the country kind of work best?
Thank you, and thanks for having me here today. I think for industry and as we're looking at these partnerships, I'm excited that we've talked a lot about the CHIPS partnerships today. This is a piece where we are actively encouraging our colleges to reach out to businesses. That's something, as we talk about forming partnerships, and I would say the same thing to the businesses too, to please reach out to your community colleges because it's incredibly important that communities are engaged in this. We were talking before the panel started about how the CHIPS incentive funding that was discussed during the last session requires that companies have a workforce development plan, but it doesn't require that they work with community colleges. They can pick whichever partner they want from their communities, and we've really been encouraging them to include community colleges and universities, of course, as well, because you need folks who are designing the chips who have the higher levels of education. But as you look, especially in the places where they're building new plants, there's going to be need for all of the skilled workforce with the chips, but there's also all of the workforce that you need in any type of manufacturing setting, any type of large building setting, HVAC, electricians, welders, the machinists who fix the equipment. So there's a wide variety of jobs that need to be filled, and community colleges can serve as a broader partner for those employers beyond just the focus on the CHIPS piece. So that's one part I really want to highlight based on what we talked about so far. And then the second piece is drawing in this thread of global competitiveness and to talk about some of the work that we're doing with cohorts of community colleges around the country. We're in a pilot program right now, and we are hoping to expand that over the next few years, where we're working with ACCT, and our partner Digital Promise is working to train faculty to help incorporate global and international skills in all of the curriculum across community colleges. And while we know that most of our students are place-based, they're, one of the main reasons they may pick their community college is because they're not looking to relocate for education, and they're likely not looking to relocate for work either. However, the likelihood that they work for an international employer, that they work with coworkers who come from other countries, who are immigrants or whose parents are immigrants, or that they have customers, clientele, where they're public facing, who are either international customers or immigrant customers, their neighbors who have immigrated from other countries, then they need all of these soft skills and understanding cross-cultural communication and kind of how the global economy works and how things are different in other places. And so we're trying to build a model for how to incorporate that into the curriculum at the community college level, regardless of what the skills or content you're learning in class are.
Yeah, can I just jump in and double down? I mean, we at Intel, we work with 112 community colleges in 39 states, and it is an incredible partnership. And what I'm really excited about is actually we now have the ability to reinvent curriculum. So you actually can program a chip after some of the programs that we're implementing at the community colleges. After 2 years, you get an equivalent of BS that allows you to design the chips, because we're focusing on no code or low code. There's some innovative things that some of the tool sets are allowing people to do. And it doesn't, you do not need a 4-year degree to come out and get a great job making a very nice salary in the semiconductor industry. I like to quote a former CEO of Intel that says, we start with sand and everything else, all the other value is added by people. And that's really what the focus is. It's sort of student-centric learning, but the community colleges are doing exciting things. So thank you for the partnership.
Thank you.
Let me ask a question to the panel, and then happy to open it up to the room. One of the things that we've seen as manufacturing has changed is that the skills that a worker needs to be successful have evolved, right? And rather than sort of using, say, a machine to produce something, you're often working with the machine, whether it's AI or whether it's a 3D printing thing or whether it's some sort of digitalization where it's sort of co-production between a worker and a machine of some kind. Can you talk a little bit about two things? One, what are those sort of skill sets that you would say a really empowered, successful worker should have going forward? And then two, are we training to those skills? And if not, how do we get there?
So I think we've seen threads of what those skills are, whether you want to call them soft skills or so there's a soft skills bucket, though I don't love that phrase because I think they're so important and that makes it sound less important. But also, in addition to that interpersonal relationship and problem solving we heard about on the last panel, and I think that the team nature of the manufacturing and not just, I'm standing on a line doing my one piece. There's also this mentality of I expect to be retrained multiple times over my career. It's no longer I'm going to go to college or career training or whatever our, all colleges post-secondary education, as we would say in my last job. But that, whatever I learn after high school, I'm going to start that job and I'm going to do that same job for 40 or 45 years and then I'm going to retire. We know that's not the reality anymore. And so I think one of the mindset shifts is that we need to incorporate training in and that we need to be lifelong learners. And that's something that I think we're seeing a lot of right now at community colleges. For years now, we've had the steady average age of community colleges has been about 27 or 28 years old for our students. One of the shifts that we've seen recently, particularly post-pandemic, is that average has stayed the same, but the groupings that are leading to that number are shifting in that we have more younger students because of the increase in dual enrollment, but we also have more adult learners who are coming back in their 30s and their 40s because they see that need to reskill. But right now, I think a lot of the conversation around that piece is, I lost a job. I'm not making a good enough wage. I think where we need to move forward is the mindset of, all right, every 5-10 years, maybe with the way technology is going, maybe even faster than that, it either needs to be built into the job position and structure, and industry needs to champion that, or individuals need to know that, they're going to have to make that choice to go back and learn those things on their own if they want to keep advancing and keep their wages growing. Are we doing it well? I've talked a while, so I'm going to punt on that because I don't know that I have a good measure for how I feel on that question, that part of the question.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up. I'll just first kind of point us to the data, which shows that 1 in 3 workers lack basic digital skills. And 75% of Black workers are missing out on available jobs, partly due to not having the digital skills needed. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us that internet is not a luxury anymore. It's a basic right, and we need to know it. So in terms of the skills, we have to think about the customized training to build those analytical and technical skills. And now as we are becoming more inclusive, we can't forget that A in DEIA around the neurodiversity and the accessibility. One thing that is working well, they are called digital navigators, and they are professionals who are typically found at community-based organizations such as YMCA, and they help people get online and help them to learn about connecting to the internet. They help them find jobs. They help them align to the skills or the expertise that they want to become a part of in order to participate in the labor market. They are culturally competent, and they provide one-to-one support, and they help them secure jobs that may appear to be elusive or difficult to get. Agree definitely on we can't eliminate the need for empathy and emotional intelligence, the things that technology may not do. And if we're going to be communicating with people across the world, we need those still communication skills. And another thing that is working well, I heard Cornell University, they require everyone in their arts and science program to take a data science course. So no matter what your major is, even in the humanities, you have a basic understanding of data, because that is very important when we talk about facts. We also need the public-private partnerships. And I would say, are we doing it well? To your point, I think we need a massive investment in adult education. And that is what we need to really hone in on, because adult education isn't always equitably funded across certain states. And we know that if we want incumbent workers to get training, to your point, if we want adults to be able to get training, there has to be funding for it. I think a lot of people think adult education, GED, is much broader than that. It's inclusive of GED, but it's also being able to be upskilled. It's also being able to be reskilled. And so we do need that increased funding in order to be able to do a good job and making sure that it's equitably distributed. So I'll stop there.
So let me take it down to a specific example of why I'm excited about there. We are seeing innovation, and we are seeing reasons for hope. And I'm going to talk about a partnership that we have with Khan Academy, and it's called Khan Amigo. And we have piloted it in Ohio in 4 school districts in the 7th grade, all the STEM classes in the 7th grade. We're just about to launch it. We're launching it in Houston. We're about to launch in Miami. And then also we're partnering with them to look at some overseas locations as well. But what is it? So with Khan Academy, and you all know Khan Academy, Khan Amigo is basically a private tutor for the students. So if you're a 7th grader and you're in a STEM class, you get a private tutor. Yes, it is an AI-enabled chatbot, but it's not giving you the answers. It's helping you figure out, where do you not understand something? But in addition to this, and this is what I'm really excited about, it also is a teacher's assistant for that teacher. So that teacher can see real time, how are the kids learning? Specifically, generating suggested lesson plans, doing the analysis of what did this class understand, what did they not understand. It's allowing them to tailor more. And it's taking the administration part of teaching off their desk to the extent possible to allow them to teach. So I am super excited because what does that mean? That means it doesn't matter what your zip code is, you can get a private tutor. This to me is gonna be able to unleash an incredible revolution in teaching and teaching in STEM. So I do think there's reasons for optimism. I totally agree with everything everyone else said up here, but I just thought I'd add a little bit of hope and innovation.
It's a really, really interesting example. Let me go to the audience and see if there's any questions. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you. So many of these significant federal investments, CHIPS.
Before you ask, could you mind identifying yourself?
Of course, my apologies. I'm Michelle Faggard. I'm with This is Planet Ed at the Aspen Institute. So the IRA, the IIJA, and the Inflation Reduction Act are also climate investments. So just wondering if you all have any examples of states or community colleges that are thinking about how to use some of these funding and create jobs in climate or clean energy.
Okay, this is sort of adjacent. Clean energy is obviously and critically important to the semiconductors. And, Intel, we've been very public about the fact that about our commitments to Scope 3, about the need for us to have green energy no matter where we invest around the world. And so we are focused on that. We have under our digital readiness program, we have an AI for sustainability that we're working with the UNDP to look at the sustainability goals because AI, one of the studies, and I forget, I don't remember my reference here, so don't quote me, but somewhere I read that AI will allow countries around the world to reach their sustainability goals 40% faster, right? So we are focusing on that aspect of how do we enhance the ability to reach the green goals, the energy sustainability goals with the use of AI.
Carrie, maybe I'll turn to you a little bit. Building off of this question, one of the jobs of the future is sort of building the technologies that we need to address climate change, whether it's EVs or batteries or solar panels. And obviously there's a lot that tech schools and community colleges can offer to that. Maybe you could speak to it.
Yes. So first, thank you for the question and for bringing up all of those landmark pieces of legislation that happened in last Congress. One thing that, as community colleges interacted on the passing of those bills, and I think one of our frustrations as those bills went through the process is that many of them started with workforce development specific funds in them. And then in pretty much all cases, my colleague Jose is here. He can correct me if I missed one, but in pretty much all cases, the workforce development funding was one of the things that every single time was left on the chopping block floor when they being Congress, decided that the bill was too expensive and we need to make it smaller. And so that's one of the pieces that was eliminated. I'm glad in the CHIPS incentive funds that they have workforce development as a requirement, but there's no separate set of money that community colleges can apply for directly. And in fact, at our last handful of national legislative summits where we bring community college trustees and community college presidents together in DC to meet with their elected officials, we've been partnering across a multitude of agencies, including ag, commerce, energy, have had secretaries or deputy secretaries come speak with us because the workforce development funds have not gone to labor or education in the clean energy fields, in the tech fields. They've gone to these other agencies. And so we've been trying to help community colleges connect the dots so that they're prepared to train the workforces that are going to be needed. And colleges know at least what's happening in their area. I had the opportunity about a year and a half ago to tour Northeast Community College in Northeast Nebraska. And so just, two quick notes from that trip. One of the things they do at Northeast is train wind turbine repair workers. And so when you're on campus, they actually have mini, it's like 10 stories instead of 30 stories tall, versions of the wind turbines. So one of their programs is we now have wind energy, but the machines that, just like with all the other examples you listed, the machines, the technology, the actual tools that make that work, need not to just be invented and built, but then they also need to be repaired. So that's one of the ways where community colleges can really help serve that role. We're also looking a lot more on the agricultural front. The Farm Bill, one of the few pieces of bipartisan legislation that routinely passes on time, though this year we're pushing that record as we come up on the extension. But one of the pieces that we've really been promoting that Northeast as well as several other rural community colleges are involved in is getting either more flexibility or dedicated grant funds within the Farm Act to help community colleges, because so much of our agricultural equipment, and particularly as ag moves both high tech and in green energy directions, now requires specific training and specific programs for workers to be able to fix that. As one of our board members who also sits on a community college board and runs his own farm in Nebraska says, he's like, I grew up learning how to fix the equipment on the farm. Today's generation, it's just much more difficult. There's so much more technology behind it. They really need training to be able to do that. So I think there are a lot of places where community colleges are, but also increasingly will need to engage across all of these technologies, particularly once they become commonplace and start breaking down and need to be repaired and replaced and maintained.
Michelle, I'm going to go to you next with a question that kind of builds off this a little bit, but I want to pick up on what you said about adult learning. So one of the topics that I think about here at CAP as a senior fellow is sort of industrial competitiveness. How do you build out our industrial competitiveness? And when you think about sort of the manufacturing base that we have in this country, the top, say, 1% are, the 15, 20, 25 companies that everybody's heard of, the big companies, the big OEMs. But the vast, vast, vast majority of our manufacturing base are small and medium-sized companies. And a lot of them produce a component part or some material that goes into sort of a larger supply chain. And those shop floors tend to look a lot like they did 20, 30 years ago, right? And one of the things, there's several things that are sort of holding small manufacturers back from upgrading their facilities, is that when you upgrade a piece of equipment, you also have to train the person who works on it on how to use the new piece of equipment. And often that means taking somebody off of the line, taking somebody off the shop floor and putting them in a classroom or some sort of seminar for a while so that they get the skills needed. And there's a clear need, I think, an opportunity for technical schools, community colleges to offer that sort of specific training, partnering with industry. But it gets to the idea that you were talking about what is adult learning. It is sometimes it's not retraining, it's just sort of upgrading existing skills. I wonder if you could build a little bit off of kind of what is a really effective, what's an ambitious looking strategy for adult learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. I see it as a very almost an MOU between the community colleges and between the industry, because another thing I want to add too is that one challenge of community colleges is that with faculty, industry is typically paying more. And so community colleges are losing their faculty to private industries. So how can we look at the needs of both to be able to make it a very circular and a very beneficial relationship on both parts? So to your point, Ryan, how can community colleges work with the local industry to be able to upgrade or retrain workers on equipment? And I think one thing about that too is that there has to be multiple touch points, because I think we are done with the days where a community college only talks to their industry partner maybe once a year, or maybe once every 2 years. There has to be at least quarterly, I would probably 4 to 5 times a year checking in, because also we have to think about, are the credentials that the community college is offering, is that matching what industry even needs? And is that also matching the local labor market? And so I think what we've done at the Century Foundation and with our partners, we've held industry roundtables where we bring the employers together with the community college, with the community-based organization, and then we also bring a worker to that table as well. So we can hear all of the perspectives on what does industry need, what does the community college need? And typically the community college needs faculty. Typically the industry needs workers, but then how do you keep them? How do you upgrade them on the new equipment? And how do we really tie in that retention factor? Because we know that that's going to be a challenge too. When I think about adult education too, I also think we have to look at it holistically, because the wages often tend to be a really big conversation. And I think one fear that I have working in this equity space is that we do not want to place employees or turn workers into low quality jobs. And that's where the employers come in to think about, how do we pay not just a living wage, but a competitive wage? Because there's competition now with fast food, there's competition with retail. So when we think about revisioning adult education, is thinking about the skills that are needed, is thinking about their holistic needs, particularly around childcare and transportation. And it's also thinking about what are the benefits, because we also can't do this without employers. We have to be responsive to the local labor market. And so I think of a circle of how do we be responsive and how do we meet both of those needs in adult education?
Yeah, thanks for that. Really interesting. Open it up again if there's any questions from the audience.
I think we have an online question.
Great.
Marcel.
Yes. So we have a participant who's thanking you all for sharing all these great initiatives and says, I'm interested in knowing how you are evaluating these initiatives, like Conamigo, for example. Are you looking at outcomes like student achievement in math and STEM? And then for the community college initiatives, are you looking at graduation rates and employment and income outcomes?
It's a great question. We actually had this discussion before the panel started about the need to not look at inputs, but to look at outputs and really look at what are you, it's not the form or the method, it's really, are we training to a level that is going to dictate success? And so the short answer is yes. I mean, from an Intel perspective, no matter what program we have, and we have extensive programs, whether it's, you know, to the point that you just made about the need to ensure that there is a public-private partnership. We have a lot of our engineers give of their time, 40 hours to do free classes at community colleges to demystify and sort of expand the horizons. And when we look at that, we're looking at what's the pull-through, right? It's not enough just to do something. What you need to do is it pulling through, and are we getting the outcomes we need? In general, we have at Intel, we know that for every 6 people that we train, 5 will go somewhere other than Intel. But that's okay, because a rising tide, you know, raises all boats. And it really is about creating an ecosystem and a community that's going to be able to compete. Again, I go back to the superpower for every country is their people. And those countries that understand that and really commit to that are going to be able to take advantage and really see the economic growth that we all aspire to.
On the community college front, it really depends on the initiative and what is the specific piece that we're trying to support. We are always trying to strive for outcomes and not inputs. It's certainly part of the conversation. On the program on globalization that I specifically talked about, we're in 3 colleges and it's about a year long. So we're not at the point yet where we can do things like track graduation and employment outcomes because we need a longer window. Right now, you know, we're trying to demonstrate that the model is functional from a faculty perspective and from a college perspective, and that you know, we're hoping that once we demonstrate that, we can move to a larger number of schools over a longer period of time, which allows for a more robust tracking and outcomes measure. And that's generally how at ACCT we've approached many of our grant projects. About 2 years ago, we launched our Center for Policy and Practice, which is at acct.org. So you can see the various projects that we're working on there. But pretty much each one gets their own evaluation plan depending on the scope and length of time. And I'll just say the length of time can be a challenge because frequently, especially for our part-time students, the amount of time it takes them, given everything they're balancing in their lives from start to completion of the program, is often longer than the window of the funded interaction. So, that's something for a broader conversation within our community here as we design these projects.
I'd like to ask a question about the globalization part that you just mentioned. I know, Sarah, you've talked about this too. When we think about sort of educating our workforce, obviously there's a huge component of educating US workers. But considering that sort of supply chains are global, they're heavily interconnected, more so than ever before, and that most things that are purchased in the US include some materials or some components made somewhere else, how do we think about the role of education in some of our partners and allies and its link to US competitiveness?
It's a fabulous question. And here I want to call out, I think, the great work that the ITSE Fund has been doing in the State Department on really working with, we've worked with Mexico and Costa Rica and some of our other friends and allies around the world to develop the ITSE Fund with the University of Arizona to develop semiconductor training and to really look at, to your point, we don't want to have everyone cannibalize each other, right? This is a semiconductor supply chain. There's something for everyone. So whether it's design or packaging, whether it's, critical minerals, whatever piece of it a country wants, there is an opportunity. But I do want to call out that, the ITSE Fund in its first year, there'll be an OECD report released soon that's going to highlight that and talk a little bit about what's needed on workforce. So there is some interesting things going on in the space of how do we think about it in a more global environment. Sorry.
So on that front, I think there are two pieces. I had two pieces. All right, I'll start. One of them. I know what the one is, but now one of them's lost. Do you have more to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say the other thing I want to throw on the table at the fear of is immigration. So like if you look at STEM. For a BA level, 10% of our BA students are from other locations. But when you go up to a PhD level, it's 70%, right? And so how do we train these fabulous people that do amazing things, but then we don't make it easy for them to stay and to contribute and to give back to the communities where they studied? And I will be diplomatic and leave it there.
Well, that helps lead into some of what I was talking about. And as I go, the second one will come back to me. So I think on the international, there we go. I got it now. Okay. So the two pieces, one is expanding international students at community colleges. And then the other are community colleges talking to their counterparts in other countries, which is very, very different than at the 4-year, at the graduate level and even at the bachelor's level. So one, it is still small, but we are seeing an increasing portion of international students coming to community colleges for a variety of reasons. Part of that might be affordability, looking for an entree into the US. Some of it is just the skills they're looking for. There are some campuses like Iowa Western, where they actually have a very developed NJCAA program. So the junior college version of the NCAA. So you see some international athletes who may not have been recruited to D1 or who may need some, more academic or language skills support before they move on to a D1 school. So, we're seeing little pockets on the international student side. But I think from the broader global competitiveness and our partnership with our allies and our business, our countries where we do the most business, we're starting to talk internally and seeing more with our community colleges and connections with State Department, et cetera, about what the level of education that community colleges provide here in the US, what that looks like in other countries, because it's far more varied in other countries than the bachelor's and graduate systems are. So, I think it's been assumed, probably since the beginning of universities here in our country, that those colleges are talking to colleges in other places in the academic circles. When community colleges started, particularly as when trade schools started, it's so hyper localized, and that's still where our value is, but as the foundation of our value. But I think there's much more being added onto that as the economy becomes increasingly globalized, and the pieces that are the most important for us to produce get products and parts from other places. So I'm excited about where those conversations are going. But I think in many cases, it's new and we're figuring it out, and it varies based on country.
Yeah.
And whether whether those countries are interested in learning from us or not.
And I would just say, to add on to that, it is very different in each country. I mean, again, at Intel, we partner with 29,370 institutions worldwide. And those institutions are everything from a 2-year, 4-year, in Japan, it's the Kosans, which is sort of like a technical school, but doesn't have an exact, it's hard to translate exactly into a US context. But what's interesting is there is a growing desire and a growing hunger around the world for this public-private partnership, and including business, and really driving it from a focus on how do we drive the next generation of workers. So
my expectations for this panel were exceeded, even though they started out quite high. So I want to thank Sarah, Michelle, and Carrie. Really interesting thoughts. Thanks for adding to the conversation and for being here today. And thank you all for joining as well.
thank you.
We will convene our final panel in this room in approximately 7 minutes. Everyone, we are about to begin our final session. If you can please head on into the main room. Please head on into the main room for our final panel. Thank you.
Well, hello again. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for our last conversation about adapting to I struggle with this all day. Adapting to a changing climate. It's hot outside. If you sweated on the way over here, this conversation's for you. If you're worried about kids in schools also sweating, this conversation is also for you and the connections between education and our changing climate. So it's my pleasure to introduce this panel, and please take the stage. We have Elizabeth Bayshard, who is the Senior Policy Analyst with Moms Clean Air Force, Laura Shifter, who is a Senior Fellow at Aspen Institute, Ginger Potter from the Environmental Protection Agency. This conversation is moderated by Francis Colon from CAP. All right, thank you all so much.
Hi, thanks. First of all, I want to say thank you to my fellow panelists who are really leading and at the forefront of this conversation. They speak about this all over the country, all over the world, and we're really privileged to have them today. The topic is the intersection of climate and education and how we're preparing, well or not, our future generation for climate impacts, for being our future leaders on climate solutions. And so today we have, to my right, Ginger Potter, Senior Education Specialist in the Office of Public Engagement and Environmental Education at the EPA. Immediately to her right, Laura Shifter, Senior Fellow at the Aspen Institute. She is the lead for the This is Planet Ed initiative. And immediately to her right, Elizabeth Béchard, Senior Policy Analyst for Moms Clean Air Force. So thank you all for being here. We're going to start by giving you a minute or two to talk about one of the things that you're working on to bridge this gap that you want everybody in the room and online to know about. And I'll start to my right, Ginger.
One of the things that I would highlight is something we're doing with the National Environmental Education and Training Program, which are the guidelines for excellence. This set of materials for educators was started in the early 1990s. The one we are currently working on is climate and climate justice, and that should be out sometime this year. And hopefully it will be something that you all can use in your classrooms or talking to people who want to know about climate, including leadership. I think this will be very, very valuable.
Great. So first of all, thank you to CAP for having this be a part of the conversation around an education summit. It's critically important. So I just wanted to start off by saying, about 5 years ago, climate change was not an issue that I thought about. I had spent a very long time working in education policy, where, as many of you know, there are a significant number of problems to be dealt with in education policy. And I thought climate change would be something that's handled by those working in environmental issues. I took faith in the myth that it was a far off distant problem or that technology would solve it. I had a climate moment where I was watching my 3 kids play in our basement and I got news alert after news alert after news alert. We had a decade left to address climate change to avoid the most devastating impacts. And in that moment, looking at my 3 kids, my work in education felt meaningless. I looked at them and I thought we could have the best education system in the world and it would not matter if the full impacts of climate change took hold. I spent some time being depressed, looking to the Environmental Defense Fund for jobs, looking to the Sierra Club for jobs, trying to figure out some way to make a pivot. And Jay Inslee announced he was running for president. And he said on day 1 of his administration, he would ask every department to submit its plan to address climate change. And that was when I realized I didn't have to go to some separate field to do this work. Actually, education needed to be at the table. In the conversations we were having around education policy, including those at CAP, they didn't talk about these issues, but there was a huge opportunity for education to start acting. So I spent some time building an initiative around what the education sector could do and launched what is now This is Planet Ed at the Aspen Institute, where we're about broad mobilization for action across early childhood, K through 12, higher education, and children's media to really prepare and enable students to thrive in a changing climate. So again, I want to say it's such an encouraging moment that this panel is happening, and really looking forward to furthering the discussion.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of Laura's comments, including the thanks to CAP for having this conversation. So I work with Moms Clean Air Force. We're a national organization of over 1.5 million parents and caregivers. We mobilize those parents and caregivers to sort of translate their climate distress, as Laura was just describing, into action on climate change and air pollution. And one of the ways that we're working at the intersection of climate change and education is with our work with electric school buses. So as you might know, electric school buses are the largest mass transit fleet in the whole country. They're also a source of climate pollution and a source of health harming diesel exhaust. And so we were really excited a couple of years ago when EPA announced their clean school bus program, which was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the $5 billion with a V dollars that were earmarked for electric school buses. And so Moms Clean Air Force has been really working at the intersection between that billions of dollars of funding and the school districts and the communities that need the funding and want clean electric buses on their roads. And so we've been working directly with school districts around the country in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado to make sure that they have the resources and the information that they need to apply for this funding that's available. And we've been really excited to see some of these electric buses start to hit the road.
That's excellent. So as a person that works on climate change every day, we talk about these closing windows to act that Laura mentioned quite a bit. The science tells us that in order to avoid some of the most severe tipping points in the changes to our planet, we have to lower our emissions significantly faster in the next couple of years, really. So our action here in the United States and around the world needs to be much faster. We are the second largest emitter and the largest historical emitter of emissions. So we have a lot of responsibility that we are all taking on quite a bit, but that we're going to need future generations to take on. And so going back to Ginger on this, can you tell us what is the state of play on climate education in our schools, in the curricula, in our schools? Are we where we need to be?
The easy answer is no. When you bring up the, universal, we're going to cut emissions and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I think it's great that countries get together and do that. And my question is always, well, how are you going to do that if you're not educating your citizens on what this means and what it means for their lives and what it's going to mean for their future? So the answer is no, we are not in the formal school system in any great way. There are very few states that require teaching about climate education, 2, 3, maybe. That's it. There has been a lot of legislation, a lot of which has simply not passed, or there's a legislation out there and it's about allowing you to talk about environmental education, not demanding that you're talking about that in schools. And for the most part, there's the funding always drops out because we do not have leadership at the highest levels who understand that education is the answer to everything. And if we do not spend the kind of money on education that we spend on other things, then we are never going to get as far as we want to get in protecting the environment.
Can I just add on to that
please.
too?
Everybody can chime in.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned is, the urgent and pressing need for us to cut emissions. And oftentimes those people within the climate space are so focused on the urgent and pressing need to cut emissions. But what they say time after time with the UN climate reports that are released is we have a lot of the technology we need and we've lacked the social and political will. And the thing that's really going to build social and political will is education. And if you could imagine right now where we would be on social and political will if 20 years ago we had fully mobilized our education system to understand climate and its solutions and how it's going to impact our world, we would just be in such a different place right now. We didn't do it then, but we really have an opportunity to start doing it now because these impacts are going to be with us for decades and decades and decades. So the urgency is really now to make this lasting investment.
Can I actually press you to share a little bit of what you shared in the green room about students' understanding on the causes of climate?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. There was a Washington Post poll done a couple years ago that found only 14% of students felt like they learned a lot about climate solutions in schools. This is one of the most pressing problems facing our world, and only 14% of students are learning about it right now. EdWeek has done some surveys. They know that students more than adults believe that climate change is human caused, which is good. But then going a level further and asking them, well, what's causing climate change? The same number of students actually think it's caused by a hole in the ozone layer as believe it's caused by the greenhouse gas effect, which we know is the cause. It's humans' reliance on energy, transportations, buildings, manufacturing, and food are the main drivers of our emissions. And if we're going to talk about solutions, we need to understand the problem. And right now that understanding is not there. And we're talking, I just am mentioning the understanding among teens right now, but a big part of the problem with it is all of the adults we have in the system too never had the opportunity to learn about climate change themselves. So we are not only expecting the education to happen, but we're dealing with the fact that as adults, we don't know it either. And one of the questions I always ask my students when I start my teaching is, how well do you understand climate change, its causes, consequences, and solutions? And you can ask the question, I understand it. You'll get a lot of people that say that, but if you then ask them, I understand it and I can teach it to somebody else, and it plummets. And that's really the difference that we need to have right now.
Thank you. Elizabeth, coming to you. Tell us a little bit more. You mentioned some aspects of this already in your first intervention, but how is climate already impacting our kids in schools? And can you tell a little bit more of this many stories you have of school districts, teachers, and students really engaging on climate action?
Yeah, absolutely. As Jared mentioned, it's really hot in DC today. And so one of the ways that climate change is already impacting us is that it's making it hotter and increasing the intensity and frequency of hot days like today. And children's bodies don't regulate temperature as well as adult bodies. So children are more vulnerable to heat-related illnesses like heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and that makes it less safe for them to play outside at school during recess. It makes it less safe for them to participate in after-school sports. And so those are things that are really important for kids' mental health. We also know that when temperatures rise, learning outcomes drop. It makes it harder for kids to concentrate in hot classrooms. Test scores go down when it's hot. And of course, that disproportionately impacts students who are in schools that lack air conditioning, whether that's because of regional differences or environmental justice impacts. Air pollution is another way that climate change is already impacting us. It's increasing the intensity and the frequency of wildfires. It's increasing the conditions that are favorable for smog formation and making pollen season worse. And so when the air is unhealthy for kids to breathe, they can experience respiratory harm, things like asthma, allergies that can increase fatigue and absenteeism in schools. Just as with extreme heat, air pollution affects cognition, and test scores go down when children are breathing unhealthy air. And of course, we know that air pollution is not evenly distributed either. There's environmental justice concerns there. Both heat and air pollution affect mental health, right? May is Mental Health Awareness Month. When students and children live through extreme weather events or climate disasters, there's stress and trauma. More and more students are experiencing climate anxiety. But one of the bright spots I want to highlight is the work of an organization called Schools for Climate Action. Moms Clean Air Force has been really proud to partner with them and to amplify their work. But their mission is really to make sure that youth voices are heard and included in climate policy. And so one of the things that students from Schools for Climate Action have done, many of these students live in wildfire affected communities in California, is to actually write climate policy. And over the last few years, they've written 2 resolutions to Congress, House resolutions, one asking for climate education. These are high school students saying, hey, we deserve climate education. We deserve to be properly equipped to navigate the world that we're inheriting. And then another resolution that they've written is one on youth mental health in a changing climate, and really asking for the resources that they need to thrive in all ways with what is coming and what is already here. And so that's a bright spot that I see.
I would like to put in here a little bit. One of the biggest problems is that a lot of people in this country look at, oh, you're the EPA, your job is to clean up the environment, your job is to make everything better. And it's the same as the Department of Education. Your job is to educate everybody about all these issues. Well, the reality is education is not a federal, we're not involved with it. It's at the state level. So you're looking at 50 different states doing 50 different things. So right now there is only one piece of legislation, no, sorry, two pieces of legislation of anything to do with the environment. One is the National Environmental Education Act, which is 1990. The second one is the Primary and Secondary Education Act reauthorization, no child left behind, no child left behind / inside. And neither one of them are funded at a level that is going to make any difference. It's really up to the states. And they have the same issue that we at the federal level have, is somebody saying, well, this is important, but that's more important. So I'm going to put the money over there instead of over here. So a lot of people look to the federal government. You guys are supposed to fix this. It is not a federal mandate. So it really means you've got to pay attention to what's going on in your state and what people are doing in your state.
But also, if it starts to become more of a request and an ask from constituents in the states where the impacts are being felt, where students and youth are feeling they don't get the resources, they're not getting the education that they need to be able to address this, we could potentially see a change, right? It was a huge coup, that case in Montana, where the youth really led on for the first time, holding accountable the actors in the fossil fuel industry on the impacts on them, right? And so could we start to see a shift there in demands for the policies that we do want to see changed, right, in the future? So with that in mind, Laura, coming to you, the climate is changing. We can all see it and feel it. This is the context in which we are educating our young people. More than even the understanding of the causes and consequences of climate, are we preparing them for a climate world that is not stable, where severe impacts will be felt? And what can we do about how they will be prepared for solutions to that world that they will face?
Yeah, so I think it's actually also really important to recognize this for education leaders more generally. We have shifted from a period of climate stability to climate instability. We all are existing in our changing climate right now. So that means we need to be thinking about education policy in a changing climate. School leaders need to think about, what does it mean to be a school leader in a changing climate? You know, our responsibility to children is to prepare them for success in their future. And right now, if we are not acknowledging the realities of climate change in that, we are preparing them for a world that's science fiction. So what that means in terms of what we need to be able to do in schools is educate them to be engaged citizens in a changing climate, to be, you know, the workers that we need in the changing climate, the business leaders that we need, the policymakers we need, and just generally the community members we need in a changing climate. And a key part of that is going to be modeling solutions. So modeling solutions in school infrastructure, things like electric school buses, having solar panels on the roof. This can show young people not only lessons about clean energy, it can also show them that we care about their future and that we're taking this seriously and we're doing our part to reduce our impact on the climate now. It can also be modeling solutions in terms of climate adaptation, saying, hey, we know it's going to be hotter, so we're going to have standards in place when it's safe for you to go outside, or when you might need to wear a mask outside because of wildfire smoke from Canada. You know, we need to start modeling some of these solutions so that children learn how to adapt and be healthy and successful in a changing climate. So I think it's about the instructional pieces in the classroom, but a really critical part in this is going to be modeling the climate mitigation and adaptation solutions that we need so that students can both see adults taking action, which is going to impact their mental health too, but then also know what they can do to take action too.
I just on that, I read recently from the Center for Communication from George Mason University, and they did a survey of people around the country. And the question was, if you had one opportunity to ask a climate scientist a question, what would be your question? And they were looking at the Yale, 6 Americas. So if you're here on the alarmed, concerned side, you were looking for solutions. What's the solution? If you were on this dismissive, doubtful side, you were like, show me the data, show me that this is actually happening because of human beings. What absolutely drew my gaze was in asking what can we do? What's the solution? Only 10% of those people asked, what can I do? It was somebody else will take care of it. And I think that is something that really needs to be focused on. The concept of responsibility. We all have responsibility, and you all know that. And that's what was so disturbing, and that's the failure because we don't have climate education in every single school in every state in this country. And until we do, I think we're only going to get so far because everybody needs to hear it.
We've also dealt with so many years of misinformation or clouding, blurring of the real causes of climate change by the deliberate actions of the fossil fuel industry, which withheld information or seeded doubt in the public. How do we deal with trying to overcome the climate change education gap, but also fighting back the misinformation, the lack of information, or the confusion that's been created out there?
So I think one thing that's really important is to recognize that the misinformation and the dismissive group is actually a really small portion of the population. Sometimes they're extremely loud, but they are actually a smaller portion of the population. And there's a lot more people. I mean, the benefits of doing this work hit so many different things. You have healthier, sustainable learning environments for kids. Who wants to put their kid on a bus that has a diesel dirty smoke fumes coming out of the back? Nobody wants that option. Adding solar panels to the roof of a school means you're spending less taxpayer dollars on energy costs, and your taxpayer dollars can go teaching and learning. That's fiscal responsibility right there. Jobs are changing in the future. These are the skills that people need for the future. I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring people to the table based on the things that we share in our values and the things that we want for our children to succeed. And when they've done work around climate messaging, the most successful climate messaging to promote action, and this is not just in the US, this is across the world, is preserving a future for our children and future generations. So actually leaning into what we are doing for them in schools is a critical way to bring people together too.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to shift us a little bit to talk about what we would like to see happen concretely. As you all know, CAP is a think tank, and one of the things that we do well is to take good policy ideas based on research and the good work that many people are doing across the country to the government as here's what we can do to make this better. Here's what we should do more of. Do less of this. Let's do more of this other thing. The Inflation Reduction Act was the largest climate package, the largest climate law in US history. $370 billion that went to our clean energy transformation, to creating jobs, to revitalizing clean manufacturing in the country, to putting incentives in the hands of consumers, but also developers of projects that would help us enter and progress down the path of that clean energy transition. Are any of the Inflation Reduction Act funds destined or in any way impacting that gap that we've identified in climate education across the country?
I would say for the most part, no in EPA. EPA got billions of dollars looking at environmental justice, greenhouse gas, I mean, billions of dollars. But there is almost nothing when it comes to education. There is a lot of outreach, a lot of information. Here, we'll give you a pamphlet, that's not education. That's the beginning of education. And that for me is what I'm having problems with. We have all this money and there is a fraction of it going to actually educating people about these issues.
I think, or you want to go first?
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, I really hear your concern, Ginger, and share that. But I want to point out a bright spot. EPA has recently announced their Clean Heavy Duty Vehicles program, which uses funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. And a lot of that funding, millions of dollars, is going to be earmarked for electric school buses. And so, Moms Clean Air Force has been working with the electric school bus program that has been funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. But we are seeing these buses on the roads in communities where they are making a difference for kids who deserve to breathe cleaner, healthier air. So we are seeing progress, and we're really excited about more buses on the road. That's one of many things. So.
I think also too, well, there might not be funding dedicated to teaching and learning specifically. There's a massive amount of funding available for school infrastructure, and it's through a non-traditional means, which is tax credits. This is the first time ever that schools will be able to benefit from tax credits because of a provision that's come to be known as direct pay, which allows non-taxable entities to be able to take advantage of tax credits. What does that mean for a school? Let's say a school system wants to build a solar array on their roof, and that cost of building that solar array is $1 million. The base credit, if they're using prevailing wages for that, is 30% off. They are benefiting directly $300,000 off the cost of that solar array. If they're in a low-income community, that's another 10% credit on top of that. If they are using domestic steel, et cetera, they're another 10% credit off of that. So that $1 million cost for that solar array becomes $500,000. These are, if you are doing an eligible project, you get them. It is not a grant application. It is not a competition. If you are doing an eligible project, you get them. And then you can support teaching and learning because you're no longer spending that money on energy costs. And you can use it to say, hey, look at these solar panels outside of our window. Let's talk about clean energy. Let's chart in math the amount of energy we're producing and see how that translates. So there's a lot of opportunity, and there's right now a lack of awareness, and we need to help schools know that that opportunity is there.
And doesn't that illustrate how resourceful our teachers always are in how they take the resources they have and really turn it into creative ways of teaching our kids, of really going around what sometimes are, small budgets. And they really put in so much more than what their job description says. So I want to maybe give you magic policy wands.
I got one.
And let's start there. What would you like to see? Wave your magic policy wand. What should we be doing to provide the support for our teachers that they need to prepare our kids for the new climate future?
The policy wand that I would like to see, and this is something I've thought about for many, many years, and a lot of the folks who are in, leadership in environmental education have thought about this. The concept of using a percentage of environmental fines for education. There are countries that do this. Taiwan comes to mind. Even a small fraction, 1% of environmental fines is millions and probably billions of dollars. That's going to take an act of Congress and a whole bunch of other things, I'm sure. But that would solve a lot of problems if we could do that. So that's the magic one I would like to wave.
Other magic policy wand?
Oh, yes. One of the things that I would really love to see happen is more funding and resources for programs that support mental health for both educators and students. And one of the ideas that was put forth in these written resolutions with Schools for Climate Action is the idea of providing funding to school districts to help them become community resilience hubs in the wake of extreme weather events, which are becoming increasingly common and more intense. And we know that schools are already incredible networks of community relationships and just general resources for families. And so I'd really love to see more funding given to these school districts to support community mental health.
So I'm going to go with magic wand at different levels, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I would like to see all school districts across the entire country have climate action plans. We have climate action plans for cities, and school districts can have climate action plans that consider reducing their carbon pollution, adapting and building resilience to a changing climate, educating, supporting, and engaging students and preparing them for success in a changing climate, and using this moment to advance equity and ensure that all students have access to a healthy, sustainable learning environment. At the state level, I'd love to see every state adopt cross-curricular climate change standards and develop the, professional development and curriculum supports that are needed to be aligned to those standards. At the federal level, I think there's opportunity for the federal government to build the capacity of districts in terms of developing these climate action plans and really using it as a moment to leverage the other federal resources that are available to accelerate that work.
I like these proposals. Excellent. Excellent. Jared, you got it all down? Okay. We're ready. So we're ready to close this panel, but I wanted to give you the opportunity for any last thoughts you want to leave us with. I think we all recognize the importance of education to confront the climate challenge. And I think that CAP really would like to take this on board, and your expertise to us is vital. So any last thoughts for us?
I mean, I just would like to reiterate again, children and youth right now, despite being the least responsible for this issue, are going to be living with it the longest. And we can't count on somebody else to address this problem. It's ultimately going to take every single one of us working together to build a better future for children and youth for generations to come. And so if you're feeling like you might not know what to do or you don't have the expertise, to just recognize there's space for you at this table, because everybody needs to be at it. And so I would encourage CAP or other entities to just come and start embracing and finding out what unique thing they have to contribute to solutions here.
Yeah, I'll echo that, Laura, and just underline that, everybody is needed in the climate movement at this moment in time, every skill set, every perspective, every set of resources. And so, as Laura was saying, everybody is welcome at this table. And we really hope that if you're listening and want to get involved, that you will reach out and find ways to do just that.
And I would say organizations like yours and yours have become very, very important to this movement because the federal government has a very small role. And I'm glad that you all are doing what you're doing, because I think that that's going to be the way that we actually make change here.
Join me in thanking our panelists today.
Well, thank you all so much for that conversation and insights. I was taking down notes, Francis, so we have a lot of more work to do and to come. And thank you to the federal government for their small but mighty role, right, when it comes to education and policies. Thank you all so much for joining us. This actually concludes our first ever Summit on Education. So thank you all. I really just want to thank all the amazing panelists, such as this panel, who have participated in this event, all of our funders, and also just our education department and events teams who really played a major role in putting this on. So thank you to my fearless and tireless, although you're probably very tired, education department here at CAP for just all their hard work and volunteering to make this happen. Our incredible events team, thank you so much as well. And so many other people, digital, I'm sorry, this is the part where you like start naming people and then people feel left out. But everyone here at CAP, outside of CAP, who if you're have a pulse, thank you. So just, so you're covered, but thank you all so much. And I would say we will see you next year, but I'm not going to say that. So anyway, thank you so much. Take care.